Hey everyone, welcome back to the In Tune interview. It's me, Steven, your loyal interview companion. And today I think we have someone who most of you will be familiar with because she's been on the show a couple of times before. Rebecca Tripp has returned once again to the Overclock podcast. Hey Rebecca, welcome.
Hi.
It's last time we talked about Twilight Princess. The time before that was Final Fantasy VI, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so we're, of course, going to do another beloved Square RPG this week. I'm just kidding. We're going to talk about Donkey Kong Country 2, which I'm pretty hyped about.
I was confused there for a second. All right.
It was a fake out. But anyway, for people who maybe don't remember you or just need a refresher, give us a little intro. Like, what kind of music are you working on these days?
I'm working on a lot of different types of things, but my primary interest is in orchestral medleys and Celtic and sort of new agey arrangements of game music. The main thing's the original work, but
right.
I have to admit the medleys are the most fun thing that I do.
Yeah, and those can be kind of enormous. Like some of them have gone up to like half an hour or something. I don't know what your longest is to date.
Longest one is still the Twilight Princess one. That's 31 minutes.
Okay. 31. I remember back then editing that episode and being like, okay, I can't play this whole thing for sure, but how much of it can I get in? Because 30 minutes would literally be half of an Overclock podcast episode, so we kind of had to book it. But
luckily, this one's only 22 minutes.
Oh, thank goodness. A nice short one. Donkey Kong is a pretty hard left, stylistically when compared to something like Twilight Princess. Let's start there. How did you decide that you wanted to invest so much time and energy into DKC 2?
Well, Donkey Kong Country 2 is actually one of my favorite video games, and I hadn't done very many covers for it. Mm-hmm. At that point, I'd only done one, which was the Sticker Brush Symphony, or Sticker Bush. People can't really decide. Right. And I just wanted to do something different, but the actual thing that really made me want to do this was my brother, because I was going to make a medley for him. It was actually going to be Minish Cap. Uh-huh. And because that's one of his favorite games. But when I brought that up to him, he said he'd rather have Metroid Prime or Donkey Kong Country 2.
Oh.
And both were very tempting.
Yeah.
Donkey Kong Country 2 was what we chose, though. Because I guess when it boiled down to it, that was the game that he and I had the most memories with playing together.
Oh, that's awesome. That's such a fun game to play with someone else. I feel like especially a sibling.
Well, I was mostly just watching him play. I've always kind of enjoyed watching, both of my brothers play video games. It's a really big part of my childhood. Mm-hmm. I started playing on my own a bit later on, but it started that way. But
between Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, I think 1 was the one, that was one of my big childhood games. I'd invite myself over to go play it at a friend's house, and we had...
Yeah, that was that way for us too.
Donkey Kong Country 2 I came to a lot later, though, so I don't quite have the nostalgic pull for it. But I think as a whole, it's probably the better game, and the soundtrack is incredibly good.
Yeah, it's top tier of top tiers.
Yes.
Donkey Kong Country 2.
Every time I listen to it again, I'm amazed at how evocative and surprisingly complex it is, considering it's on such a limited hardware.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's actually kind of a good way to roll into a first question about your arrangement. The genre in this game, the musical genre, really jumps around a lot.
Yeah.
How did you mix all of that together and give your spin on it?
Well, the process is not actually that different from the other medleys. At a glance, it might seem like this soundtrack is diverse, but if you look at, say, Final Fantasy IX, or even Chrono Trigger, had a huge diversity of genres. It's just that it's all with the same sound font, so it sounds like it's all the same.
That's true, yeah.
But with this one, it's true that there was a little bit more of a starkness between certain things. Like, for example, the roller coaster level is nothing like the forest level, right?
Yes.
They sound like they could even be different composers, unless you kind of get used to the nuances of David Weiss, right? Mm-hmm. And even then, like, he's definitely diverse. I actually did kind of what I did with the Twilight Princess one, where I divided it into different chapters, so to speak. So the first part was the pirate section. Mm-hmm. So I had the Below Decks. It starts with a guy sitting on the deck playing accordion, or perhaps he's below the decks. I guess he should be below the decks.
To be thematically proper, yes.
Yeah, he's playing it very slowly, and he's getting into it, and it winds up. And I'm trying to wind us up almost like we're opening a storybook,
Mm-hmm.
And what I did was I used the piratey sounding songs in succession from the ones that sounded more like folk music, slowly turning into the ones that sound more like movie music and orchestral music.
Right.
So, for example, the Jib Jig is kind of like a cross between Below Decks and the title theme in its aesthetic. It sounds still like it could be an Irish song. It's still got that kind of archaic quality, but it also kind of goes over the top with the melody. It's more about adventure than it is about being historically accurate.
Right.
And then you get to the title theme, and then it's not archaic. It's sort of the pirate version of archaic. Pirate's kind of like its own theme altogether.
Once you kind of get off the pirate ship, I guess, it's like story-wise, how did you decide where to go next? Like, did you try to do this in some sort of chronological order, or did you have another storytelling motif?
There's always a little bit of storytelling motif and a little bit of a consideration for chronological order. Mm-hmm. It really depends what sounds better musically when I get to it. But in this case, I was trying to imagine commonalities between the levels that we're shifting between.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Logjaw's Saga, or the ship hold theme, that's the underwater music for when you're in the ship graveyard. I mean, that still has the ships in common with the first tracks.
Right.
It's still piratey, but it's piratey and dungeony.
Right. You're trying to move into the proper adventure.
Exactly. So after that, I guess adventure is I actually named the arcs when I'm working, and the second arc I did name adventure.
Oh,
as you
cool.
say.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
And once there, we go to the island because that's where the monkeys would naturally go after they're done swimming out of the ship graveyard or wherever they happen to be. And they find themselves on the island, and they look up, and everything's hostile. It's sort of out of the frying pan and into the fire. So I upped the ante with all the cinematic orchestral sounds, I guess. We're establishing a military presence on the island. And that's sort of a part that's downplayed in the story of Donkey Kong Country 2, because a lot of the story has to be inferred. Mm-hmm. But the castles are not of monkey design, right? Everything the monkeys make is natural. It's made out of wood. Mm-hmm. It's in harmony with the world they're living in. The reptiles, everything they create is barbaric, invasive, and reminiscent of colonialism.
Mm-hmm. They're the Saruman of the Donkey Kong world.
That's exactly right. The medley we're moving out of the adventure part, but very slowly, and that's as the dungeons get less creepy gradually. Mm-hmm. And then they start to get cool. when we're done with the adventure part, the levels are also getting slightly more natural.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of a dungeon break where you have to pass through a bunch of natural barriers, such as the beehives and the lava and everything, before we can get to the next part where the reptiles are messing with the monkeys.
Right. The I think it must be the beehive level. It's Flight of the Zinger. That always stuck out in my mind in the original game for being so intense.
Oh yeah.
It's like clutch your controller, heart racing sort of intense.
They managed to make all of those Zinger levels feel really down to the wire.
Yes.
The Zinger part was meant to be a pinnacle of fear and intensity of the natural world. So that kind of fits with what we were talking about, those levels being very tense. I tried to kind of amplify that with some of the effects. I did a lot of panning. I used sort of a surround sound. I had different people plucking pizzicato strings in different locations so that it would sound like there's stuff happening all around you.
Oh, perhaps like several bees rotating around your vicinity.
Exactly, rotating and milling around, right? And I switch instruments constantly, so that main background noise that you hear in the track, really fast part, it's actually about 7 or 8 different instruments switching between them, and they're all in different positions, like a hive mind communicating. And I wanted to make the melody part very smooth like honey, you're gliding along, but overwhelm the listener with input in almost a psychedelic manner. It's not meant to be unpleasant, it's just meant to be intense. And I figured that would be a really good place to shift to the roller coaster level, which is kind of oversaturation of brain chemicals.
I thought you were going to skip over Disco Train, honestly, because it has such a weird sound, and it seems like Dave Wise even added in these super compressed screams of.
He did.
Which kind of it sounds like an amusement park, like a roller coaster, but it also adds kind of a horror element on top of that.
Yes.
And
I love that. Well, I thought it would be by far the most fun track in the medley. I chose it because I thought it would be a very interesting challenge, because that track, just the original track, is not anything like my music.
Right.
So I thought, how am I going to make this fit? Whenever I'm trying to come up with the order to put songs in it, there's sort of a philosophy that goes behind it, right? There's story reasons, and then there's also the emotional journey I want to take the listener in, right? So I thought, okay, this will be just like a roller coaster. The Flight of the Zinger built you up to a really tall height of tension, musically.
Right.
And Funky comes after the Disco Train, and Funky is a very relaxed song, even though it's upbeat in comparison. So it was kind of like this Disco Train level takes you through the ultimate climax and then suddenly drops you, and the scream is like a big emotional release, right?
The adrenaline rush is over, and now you can relax a little bit.
And you can slide into the next songs, which are very relaxing in a different kind of way from the conclusion songs. I was thinking, disco is not exactly a genre that's easy to reproduce with orchestral instruments. So I figured the closest thing to it that I've ever heard was brass band jazz.
Oh.
Because it has some kind of similar types of syncopation.
Right.
So I decided to let the trombone carry the majority of it. I also changed one of the instruments to a bell because I wanted it to be reminiscent of the people who come by and nearly hit you. You hear the bells, it's ding, 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 as they're coming closer.
And what did you use for the screams in the background?
Actually, it was really hard to find the right sound. I spent many hours looking for it, and I ended up finding samples of different types of screams, and they all just sounded like people were getting murdered, or none of them sounded right. In the end, I found a recording of a bunch of girls screaming for the Beatles.
I love that backstory. You did not disappoint.
There are actually other sounds hidden in the track too. Right as we switch to Funky the main monkey, there's actually a guy's voice. It's really quiet, but he goes, "Yeah," like that.
A classic Funky quote. That's pretty good. Yeah. That's pretty good. And I assume if you have a 23 or 22 minute medley, you can include a lot of little Easter eggs or tiny moments that people are not going to catch the first way through.
Funky the Main Monkey is so seamless with the disco train. I had to change a lot of things, change the key and everything to make it. But they have a very similar kind of tone to them, except one is very, very manic and one is very chill. But they kind of complete each other.
Two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And Mining Melancholy, I figured out from listening to the rhythm of the funky song that I could kind of transition the rhythm and percussion from there to the classic hammer sounds of the mining song. The mining and the disco train were my two favorite parts of the entire medley. And the mining one I've been looking forward to. For many years I've planned to use these Anvil VSTs that I have.
Oh.
Because I wanted to do just standalone version of the song, which I ended up doing. I made a different export for just the mining song where I extended it and added some variations and stuff.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, this one I used a whole bunch of different things. There's orchestral sound effects where people are hitting various metal objects in the orchestra, and then there's anvils and there's sort of bell sound effects, and I use them all together to create the sounds of far away and close by percussive hammering and mining. I started out the part kind of sounding industrial and metallic, and I wanted to have it more rhythmic and show the unnatural aspect of the mining. Mm-hmm. But on the second part of the mining song, I emphasized the natural part, because I always really enjoyed this juxtaposition of seeing all the man-made objects and all the TNT and all the tools and everything and scaffolding, and then in the background are these gorgeous crystals, and you kind of feel in awe of their presence, and you can't really have the industrial part without the crystals, or vice versa, and have it be the same level. There's something about that juxtaposition.
That is super cool. I also like how you're able to sort of further that sort of opposite relationship by moving in directly from the mining level into the sort of pure crystallized snow world that then moves into like the two sort of gorgeous forested, I guess, peaceful tracks.
Yeah, and that was intentional. I put a lot of thought behind that. The Snowbound Land I figure would be kind of like an anticlimax to the mining song's climax, or the second part of it. It's a song that unwinds you. It's kind of a little plateau where you can rest for a little while because all the other songs were getting so manic. Right. Even the mining song has a lot of mania to it at certain parts, from my perspective anyway. That type of rhythm has a very intense, ecstatic quality to it for a lot of listeners. It's just like the Magitech Factory in those types of songs, right?
Yes.
So I thought, that the ice crystals are kind of like the cave crystals. They're both cavernous sounding songs. Here's the soft, pure version. Here's the kind of beauty you can get just naturally without having to work for anything or destroy anything. Here's a chance for the listener to just appreciate beauty in its raw form.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a deceptively beautiful track. It doesn't get mentioned all that often, I feel, comparatively. And I don't think I noticed it back when I played the game years ago, at least and got to that level, because I think I was so focused on staying alive that I wasn't really listening to the music.
Yeah, that's part of the virtue of the track. It's meant to be subtle.
And then we kind of move into the very ending. You've got the forest interlude and the sticker brush symphony.
The forest theme in this medley, I think, is sort of like the jewel. But this is, I'm doing this on purpose now. This is the LotR of the song. it's like a emerald segment that you stop through and just enjoy this pure natural beauty.
Right.
The forest interlude was an interesting challenge because there are bird sounds in the song, and the birds are rhythmic and musical.
Yeah.
They're used as a MIDI track, or like a MIDI track. I have actual bird sounds in it, but I used a bunch of instruments to try and create the sound of cyclical bird song.
Mm-hmm.
So I used glockenspiel and piccolo and harp and clarinet to try and create this textured, resonant/dissonant sound of birds piping in the trees.
When we kind of come up to the finale in Stickerbrush, what did you want to achieve there? Did you just want to sort of reproduce the sounds and feelings from the original, or give it something new?
A little bit of both. I wanted to elaborate on it because people have heard the song so often,
right,
that they're sick of it. So I wanted to put a lot of variations and make it very long, and really needed to do justice to this piece, but it's just been covered again and again and again. So I tried really hard to make it sound original while simultaneously preserving the nostalgia.
Right.
So I added in a ton of layers to this one. All instruments play at some point, except for the anvil.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea with it, from a psychological perspective, was to release all remaining tension. Even the forest interlude has a bit of tension. It's just a different type.
Right.
This one, I want the player to suddenly let go of all gravity and very slowly float upwards.
So when you finally finished up the DKC2 medley, what did you feel like you sort of learned from that? Like, what were your big takeaways?
Definitely learned to use my VSTs better.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely it was good practice, let's put it that way. This was probably one of the ones that took me the longest and I worked the hardest on.
Oh, nice.
So that for sure. I also feel like I had to think outside my box a little bit with the arrangement, because David Weiss is very unique. He uses a lot of different styles and effects that aren't typical for me or the other composers I usually like to make covers for.
Right.
My music is typically more atmospheric than, say, Final Fantasy, so it's kind of interesting. If I was doing a Final Fantasy medley, I'd often, well, maybe not with a medley, but just a cover, I might take a very melodious track and then make it more atmospheric.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, I'm trying to bring the melody out.
Right.
And, I mean, the melodies they're very prominent, but they're definitely meant to be part of a tapestry.
And this is actually kind of a good segue into other stuff you've been working on recently. Is there anything that you're especially excited about to kind of talk about here before we finish up?
Oh, yeah. Very excited.
Okay.
I've had a few different people offer to perform my music live this year. So one of those is going to be happening on November the 1st. My Temple of Time choral piece is going to be performed.
That one was a good one. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I had to write lyrics for it. It's no longer gibberish.
Oh, wait. How did you? That's a whole new interview, I guess. How did you do that? short version. How did you do that?
I made a whole bunch of notes of all the things I wanted to include and broke them up into different sections that seemed to logically flow together and turned those into lyrics.
Oh. Yeah, that was actually a really efficient summary. Cool.
I'm also going to have my Chrono Trigger medley performed live by a small orchestra next year in the summer.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'm going to be on all my social media, that there's going to be information about that as it comes. So I'll keep you updated about that too.
Very cool. And where can people find said social media information?
My YouTube channel, Rebecca E. Tripp. I have a Facebook fan page that I link to on the bottom of all my videos, and also just on the YouTube main page.
That sounds very good. I'm looking forward to hearing all of that. Thanks again, and we're going to head back to the show now.